I've called my speech today From Values to Value, and I'll start off with the most important people in my life. This is Paula and our kids. There are 5 of them, so honesty abides to tell you that we've done that in double shifts. But the reason why I show this is quite simple. Delta is a family business. I joined the company after my economics and accounting studies in '96 with my father. And in 2001, there was one morning he said, "That's it, you're going to go continuing." Which I did. I went to ING, got myself a massive loan, bigger car and a new business card, and off I went. And the outside pretty much looked good, but the inside of me still was a bit insecure. When I looked in the morning in the mirror, there was a part of me that felt that it was still a bit early and you do things with your brain, but not necessarily with the ease of experience. And the second thing was I did it in a way that my father always did it, but which wasn't necessarily my way. And in 2003, I met an American architect, Bill McDonough, the co-author of the book Cradle. And we did a tender together, and I read his book, and I really got fired up by his ideas. It really struck a nerve with me. And there were 2 particular sentences in that book that really changed my life, both privately and professionally. And the first one was, how do we measure success? And for me, that was a very important question. There's a lot of spare time going into work. And I thought, when I'm 85 and I don't like working anymore, I can't work anymore, and I stare into the fireplace, what is it that I've done? Okay, I make money, that's fine. But is there anything else that I've done? And for me, that basic question, what did I do for my children? What did I leave behind? Has very much to do with love. And for me, that was a very big driver. And the second one was, what kind of world do we want to create? I'm a developer, I'm building tomorrow's world. I want that world to be a little bit better tomorrow than it is today. And it's as simple as that. So I bought I bought as many books as I could, gave everyone a copy, steamed in, this is what we're going to do. And everyone looked at me glazingly and said, right. So I made it my goal, and I was still trained as an economist and an accountant, so I thought, we're going to do this and do this as business. I want our business to be thriving, because if I don't do that, then everyone's going to look at me. I will have built some great buildings with an empty wallet, and everyone looks at it, right, and then go back to business as usual. So if you're in a pretty much money-driven and you're stuck into a short-term business model, as transactional business model as development actually is, time to rethink a little bit. 225,000 people will join us today, net, and tomorrow again, and tomorrow and the day after again. And I know with 5 kids I did do my share with that as well. But what it does, it's all that exponential growth is really pushing our world to unhealthy limits. Technology growing, you see data growing, you see regulation trying to keep it all in bay, and this basically is a sign of our system sort of failing. But what it also does, it creates much more system complexity in our world. And I find it that as a society we seem to react in 2 different ways on that. And the one is we specialize. So we have people knowing more and more about less and less, which makes it quite hard to holistically look at questions. And the other thing is that I find that people are generalizing or pushing back and wanting to go back to what was, which is quite hard in a river that's moving, or make assumptions. And well, populism I find is another of that. But if you're generalizing on the one hand and you know nothing about everything, you know everything about nothing by specializing, in the end there's still two equations with 0, and I find it quite confusing, and a lot of people I think are. And I find it with our industry, with all that information and know-how, we're not particularly per se getting any smarter. I had an interesting discussion about a year ago with IBM on their artificial intelligence program, because they said, no, AI can help us with that. And they gave me an example of a particular question, and they said the system filters out of the 1,000 different opportunities, it filters out 995, and you get the 5 most relevant that you can choose from. So the human element is still there. But when I asked them, what are the underlying values in the algorithm, then it became a bit fuzzy, and everyone's still like, yeah, well, the sort of the statistic relevance, etc. And I find that a world that I may not necessarily want to live in. I think it's not that hard. When things get complex, you need to go to what should be unshakable, which is your own values. And if I just show 2 pictures and I ask you, what kind of world do you want to make? There are relatively little people that want to go to that bottom world, but somehow in the morning we wake up, we put our business attire on, we put our business cards in, and collectively we've created a system that still goes that way. And it intrigues me. And that will of people to go there is something that I've used also very much in our business. I found at the moment that I started pushing this, that my people stopped working for me. Some left, and the ones that stayed stopped working for me. They started working for themselves. And that passion was a very important element for us to make a change and to drive our business. What also is that I think we should look at the basic business model that our industry is in. It's interesting to be a second generation. My father was born in 1937. He lived just before the war in the southwestern part of Zealand in Holland, son of the local print shop, pretty poor. Then the war came, and his youth was really defined by scarcity. And his program in life was, I need to do better. I need to take care of my kids and my family. And his way of doing was make as much money as he could, which he did. And my youth was quite different. My program is a different one. But his program was, I need to make a profit. In order to do that, I need to make as many square meters as I can. My strategy and tactics is to do that, sell it at the highest cost, or the highest price with the lowest cost. Benchmarking a little bit to what the rest of the market does, so you're a bit higher or a bit lower. In the end, you put something down. But if you're doing real estate, which is a long-term product, I mean, just look around us here. Real estate is a long-term play. And if you're doing that with a short-term transactional model, it's an absolute miracle if you hit something of long-term value here. What also happens is that when you're working together, you're creating win-lose situations. If I sit here with a contractor and I want to win, I want to maximize my profit, a little bit dependent on how the market goes in terms of supply and demand, but try to push down as much as I can, and in the beginning I have a price, I'm happy, and then at the end no one wants to work for nothing, so the contractor tries to gain a little bit back, and we're chasing each other, and in the end all that friction is actually creating a lose-lose situation, because we don't work together, we don't really use our know-how, we don't innovate. I think it should be done in a different way, and I think we should start with values and principles. If we are going to work together, if we don't share values and principles, it's going to be a disaster anyway, and it's not much fun. And one of the principles is, we should make a decent profit, so should you. And let's have the discussion up front. Let's create transparency, let's create trust, let's try to establish long-term business relations rather than the short-term transactionals. And if you do that, if you can establish trust and a joint an alignment of interest, then you can talk about visions and goals for projects and define them, and then put your strategy and tactics towards that. And obviously, somewhere down the line, budgets will be too tight, things will go wrong, but at least if you share these, you have something to go back to. And the result of it is then square meters, and the real result is value, which is of course financial value in terms of profit for everyone, but also social and ecological value. And this approach, this basic approach, how you approach your business partners, how you approach your projects, for us has really created a big difference. And it's a quality approach rather than a quantitative approach. And this is very much about long-term value creation, and this is very much about how do I stand out towards the rest. So our main driver for for our circularity and for our projects is Cradle to Cradle. And the reason why I like Cradle to Cradle is that it's such a holistic view on sustainability. We basically translate it into five elements. One is the choice of materials. We're very keen on using only materials that can either go back safely to nature or can be recycled in an industrial process. The second one is the idea of circular economy. So promote reverse logistics, continuous endless reuse, and the creation of new business models. And for this, you do need your supply chain. You do need your partners. You do need long-term contracts. If you squeeze out anything, why would your business partner innovate with you? Why would he take a risk? There is no basis for it. If you create long-term partnerships, then you can share risks and you can use each other's know-how. Energy, water, and social welfare. This started with a project we're doing near Schiphol Airport. It's a 100,000 square meter office and facilities with a 18,000 square meter hotel. And we started to do this really from the get-go. Built really from 2011, 2012, when it was really, really hard to get financing to do that. And it's been done in a market where there was more than 16% vacancy, and where the average rental rate at that time at Schiphol was around 130 euros. And we started this project at 200 euros. So we were well above the market. Everyone said, "You're absolutely crazy." And there were times I thought so too. But we were the only ones leasing. We were the only ones selling. And it's created a quality that is well beyond anything that is there in the market. We've created a number of farms, some greenhouses. The pavilion is a sort of an experiment we did with all the suppliers to test some of the ideas, and it's still our office as well. This is Hans driving the urban farm, which supplies the restaurants and in the park. And this is a building we made for Bosch Siemens. And apart from all the stuff, this is very much about experience. It's also very much about quality. And one of the things I liked about this particular building is that the whole pride of the people for Bosch Siemens working in there went up massively. We have a 96% approval rate, people being very satisfied with it. There's a 200% hike in spontaneous job applications for Bosch Siemens since they went into the building. And very surprised to hear also 20% down in internal emails. And that has very much to do with the atrium and the way we've put the different walking route through the building. But there's much more communication and connection between the people. We see our buildings basically as materials in storage. They're future material banks. And we use the concepts, of course, designed for disassembly. And this has been a step-by-step approach, where we really had to go also sit with local authorities, talk about and question things from our building codes, rather than what do you intend to regulate, rather than how do we always do it, and invite them also to some creativity. Cradle to cradle certified materials, or find acceptable alternatives. And this has been really driving our long-term partnerships with the supply chain. When we started, we were used to working with a general contractor, with whom we worked, but you actually notice that the whole supply chain behind it is where a lot of innovation takes place, and actually that's where the materials come from. So to go beyond the contractor and go into that supply chain was, for one, starting to push on their business model. So we had to sit down, create transparency and a joint procurement of stuff, which was quite a challenge, I can assure you. We have more than 70 long-term partnerships with suppliers, and we basically changed our procurement question from "this is what I want, give us your lowest price," to "this is our ambition, this is our budget, give us your highest quality." And in order to do that, you need leadership to create trust, and that means also by giving it and by creating transparency. And we've been disappointed maybe a few times, but really most of the times, those 70 suppliers have been with us for years. And what you get, we also invited them to co-design with us. So in a very early stage, we have that design, that supply chain on board. Because we do projects step by step, we always introduce one particular thing that we want to innovate in. We use our turnover for the project to share risks, to create something new. And that's also an interesting way of innovating within a relatively small company that we are. But using that supply chain, bringing some universities, bring your client in and learn something step by step, but one thing for each project. And it's really been a process where you do 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because you also make mistakes and not everything works. And it's also I'm very keen to always look at what is the value we create. I try to put our people and challenge them on it, because of course we have our feasibilities and we have our budgets and we have our plannings that we need to stay within. But if you push your people and set them free, try to do the most with that budget, and they come to you and they say, well, I have this thing, but it's a bit more expensive, what do you think? And I always challenge them with the first question is, can you achieve the same thing in a different way that is actually more cheaper? Well, because then you're not efficient. And the second question is, what's the value you create? And quite often you see that some of that value may end up with someone else. The split incentive between developer and investor, which is also why we're moving and starting to become much more integrated and developing investor model. But some of the measures may create values that are not immediately not immediately be translated into money. I mean, what's the value of aesthetics? What's the value of clean air? What's the value of happiness? And this has really to do with the imperfection of our measure of value. So challenging them on that and try to render it visible and be entrepreneurial in how you can monetize that value, and you can link that value to our investment. And it becomes a very entrepreneurial push to look at it in that way, and not just do it from a minimum point of view, but see how can you create better business with it. And that's been quite an interesting movement. Our BIM modeling has been also very instrumental in creating a broad design model where we can very early on bring in the supply chain and get that know-how in, so we can create material passports. I'm by now not such a big fan anymore of material passports, creating the digital twin of reality, and you find yourself 5 years later that the digital twin may not reflect the reality anymore. I'm much more into RFID tagging our more expensive components and following in that way in situ. And we've really pushed the boundaries in terms of going from ownership to services, which is a way to bring residual value that you have in components and materials forward. And what I also found is that, funny enough, we started looking at from the outside in, because the most bulk and the materials are in the main construction and the facade, but the most changes are actually in the interior. So we're going much more from the inside out now. And by doing that, because when you lower your deconstruction cost by design for this assembly, and you optimize your residual value by using these approaches, what you're doing is you're lowering the economic barrier for change. And by that you make your buildings more agile, which is kind of interesting. You design for the end of use, but by doing that, the end becomes further away. And it's easier to convert an interior. It's easier to create experiences within buildings. And by having those partners in and making them part of it, you start to monetize some of the advantages, which results in lower service costs, lower maintenance costs, high residual value, and most definitely lower investment risk. And we look at it in a number of steps. Obviously, the best way is to keep a building the way it is and release it. But if not, and you can repurpose the building into something else, that is a massive advantage. If not, and you can reuse components and materials and products, then the materials. And if you're not, you're looking at demolition costs. And from where the world is moving, Julius said the impact our industry has on the world, and particularly in waste. I am absolutely convinced that we'll see a wave of regulation coming towards us that will push, where society will start to push back to us. And if you think also in we're talking about carbon emissions, but think also of the embedded energy that's all stored in materials, etc., that no one really addresses, but that regulation will come. And I think having a well-defined building that can be taken apart, where you have an inventory and you know exactly what's in it, and with materials that can go back to nature or can be recycled, simply has lower investment risk. What it also does is it creates healthier, more productive buildings. And this came really from our cradle-to-cradle material selection, which is very keen on non-off-gassing materials. And there's a lot of value in that as well. I mean, the real driver, particularly for any kind of real estate, really is the user. And we've put quite a bit of work in basically going from our healthy material selections in all the components and stuff that really drive well-being and health in there. One of the biggest problems is that value is so hard to measure. Everyone understands it. I've been doing this now for almost 25 years, and every time we deliver a building, you start to talk with a new tenant, there's always this, it does much more than they originally anticipated. It has an organizational effect. It has effect on the people. And of course, those things are defined by indoor air quality, by lighting, thermal comforts, acoustics, the design and the aesthetics, and particularly nature in buildings, which has a fantastic effect on people. We started to use the Leesman Index as a measure of how people perceive their productivity inside buildings. And obviously, this is a questionnaire-based tool, and we do a pre- and post-move survey. The pre one gives a fantastic analysis of what people like, particularly in the office part, of what they like and what they don't like, and what drives or doesn't drive their productivity. And afterwards, we do it again, and we see what the results are, and they are always amazing. And then we asked KPMG to use some of their integrated reporting tools to monetize that. Because I really feel that a lot of the investment decisions are always made, housing is usually under the CFO. You start into a building with the CEO, they like it, and then the CFO looks at it and he looks at the numbers and say, well, what's the rent, what's the service charges, how does that translate? And that's a more, again, short-term approach. So by talking money, you've changed the dialogue. We did with the World Green Building Council a study for an office we did in Leiden for a company called Herema. It's a 23,000 square meter building. And we did a pre and post analysis, and the calculation KPMG made that the increased productivity of that particular building from the move to our client had a net present value of 42 million and an annual rent of 4 million. So the building paid 10 years its own lease. And there's a lot you can say about the methods, etc. But the simple fact that we started to do it and have that dialogue really changed the whole dynamic with that particular client. And the next thing we're doing now is we're moving into much more performance-based lease, where part of our remuneration is also linked to the performance of our buildings. And that's ultimately the real test, put your money where your mouth is. And that's a very strong and compelling commercial aspect. So it's really looking at this as business as an engine for change. And it's constantly trying to translate this. How does it lower cost for me, my tenant, my investor? How does it up revenues, and how does it lower risks? And the risk part is always the more fuzzy part, because this is quite measurable and that is a little bit less so, but it's there nonetheless. This is a sheet from our logistics division. We're launching a large REIT based on circular real estate for logistics, where we've sort of made a simple sheet. These are the things that we want to do. These are the individual things the measures we take in it, and this is the business promise that we want to do. And I think looking at that in that way and defining it in that way really drives long-term real estate value. And rendering that visible is really a job that we as an industry need to do better, towards our clients, towards our investors, etc. The other thing is also has to do about leadership, and that's why it's always good to talk to you all here. I love Peter Drucker. I mean, it's a manager's job to do things the right way and to be efficient, but it's an executive job to do the right thing. So, what's the right thing? In the end, it's as simple as that. If you push, we are all human beings. We can all make that change, and we're all in our business, and we're all driven by our results, and they can be either quarterly results with the regime of a public company. I realize that the luxury of being private and being an owner, which allows me a bit more freedom. But in the end, as people, we should all want to go here. And if we harness that energy within ourselves, within our people, then we can all make a change. And I don't do it all at once. You can do it step by step, and you will learn. And there's a good saying, pioneers get killed and settlers get rich. But we should move, because that wave of regulation, that wave of society starting to push back will come. And our industry is not very nimble, our product is not very nimble, and if you're not ready, it will eat you. So, time to rethink and lead and act. We can all make a change, and we can still build cathedrals. All right, thank you very much.